Hey everybody, my name is Suk. Welcome to Lead Guitar Workshop, and today I want to talk about a few ideas on how to better understand the modes. This is a big topic for people. There's a lot of confusion around it, and especially for us guitar players, we have a double whammy trying to deal with this environment. So let's first talk about this. First and foremost, we're musicians and guitar players. You have to think of them as two separate things. There's a language of music, and that's independent of the instruments. Then we have guitar. We have to deal with how, as a guitar player, we translate the music language. So let's talk quickly about the music language and modes. In a quick sense, there's 12 notes in all of music, right? That's all you have to know. A, B, C, D, F, G are 7 of them, and there are 5 sharps and flats in between, and that's 12 total notes. That's our entire music language. Within that, there's 12 keys. A key is a family of notes that have 7 notes, we'll say for now, and they have 7 chords. They go with each of the notes, and each key is the same. So there's 12 keys, 1 for each of the notes. Once you get the idea for one of the families or the keys, it's the same for all 12. You just have different letter names associated with them. In the mode world, this is an important formula, is the order of the chords and their qualities. So if you know the notes of a major scale, you'll also know the chords in that key if you follow this formula. The first chord is major, the second is minor, the third is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, and 6 is minor. That's the relative minor. 7 is a diminished chord, and honestly, you can just kind of put that out in the backyard and let that dog run around for a little while because you're not going to need to hang out with it for a bit. And this makes it easy because now there's 3 major and 3 minor chords in every key. This would also result in their scales that are associated with them. The names of the modes, as you've probably heard, the first one is called Ionian. That's a major mode, goes with a 1 chord. Dorian is a minor mode, that goes with a 2 chord. Phrygian is the 3rd mode, that goes with the 3rd chord, that's minor. The 4th mode is Lydian, that's a major mode, major chord. 5 is major, that's called Mixolydian, it's also a major mode. And the 6th, the natural minor, is called Aeolian. The last one that goes with diminished is called Locrian, again, but let that dog run out in the backyard for a while. So getting with that being said, let's get into the 5 ideas that will help you understand how we deal with modes, especially as a guitar player. The first thing is that modes are a noun and a verb. They're a thing and an action. What do I mean by that? If you, just in a chord sense, in a scale sense, just by basing a tonality on one of the degrees of the scale, that makes a mode exist. Right? And then there's the verb side of it when people get modal. They play modally. They really kind of squeeze the modality out of it. The Grateful Dead, vamping on 2 chords back and forth for a long time. That's acting in a modal way. You're really conjuring the sound of the modes. So there's because sometimes the modes don't have to be in your head or in your actions for them to exist. I mean, just a song that has G, C, and D, that's in a mode, right? We may not be modal with it, but it's in G major. That leads me to the second one, and this helps tie the first one together. Here's the big one. This is one of the big ones. Modes are scales. So you've probably heard about this, that if you take let's say, I'm going to say G major just for guitar, it's easier to almost think about than C sometimes. So if I took the key of G, the chords would be G, A minor, B minor, C, D, and E minor. Those are your 6 chords. The resulting scale is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, right? And if you can base, you've probably heard modes are a major scale starting on, say, the 2nd note. That's totally true. So if I took this G major scale, now by the way, G major is a mode. It's called Ionian. Major is Ionian. Minor is Aeolian. So already 2 modes already exist just with the concept of major and minor that we talk about. So if you took a G major scale and you started it from A and you went A to A, and you hit the A minor chord, that scale is an A Dorian scale. That's a very cool concept. But here's where it really gets amazing, is that modes are also chord progressions. Boom, that one blew me away. That took me a long time. And honestly, in like today's world, you see modes existing as chord progressions, and that helps you immensely with so many things, learning, playing, creating, writing music, and so forth. So for instance, in the key of G, there's the A minor chord. And let's say there's a D chord, which there is, of course. So if I played a chord progression that was A minor to D, that's technically an A Dorian chord progression, especially if I resolve back to the A minor. Of course, that's what has to make it happen. So that's how you decide. How do you know what mode? How do I know it wasn't in the D? Because if I make it resolve to the chord, that's the definitive answer. That's the one it comes back to. So here's a cool little trick to help with the chord progression part. If you are in a key, and we know in the key of G, we have a C and a D chord, you can kind of elicit the sound of modes by taking your select chord and using the C and D with it. So for instance, here's a G Ionian chord progression. I can do a bar G, and then a split measure of C and D. Right? And it resolves to G. That's a G Ionian modal chord progression. If I do it from A minor and include the C and D, that's an A Dorian progression. Let's keep going. If I do it with B minor and keep the C and the D, that's B Phrygian. Now for C and D, they kind of just go with each other. So if you had a song like Frank Zappa used to love Lydian stuff, Dreams by Fleetwood Mac is the same thing. You play the 4 chord and then the 5 chord. Now Lydian's a little tricky. It's always hard to kind of resolve it to the... Lydian always has kind of an airy, questionable color to it. D mixed Lydian, you would just do D back to C. And then finally for E minor C to D. So you can elicit the sound of modes with the chord progressions. That's what they are, right? You don't have a choice about. Once that chord progression's there, the mode exists. Notes you sing that just sound right are in that modal scale, whether you're thinking about it or not. And that's really a cool part of this thing. Just a little quick intermission here with the color of the modes. This stuff I just feel. Whether you're playing it as chords or as scales, the modes have moods. Here's my personal take on them. I kind of call them my toaster settings. Ionian is vanilla. We all love vanilla. I love vanilla ice cream. I love it. It's really great. But it's vanilla. It's pretty straight down the middle of the road. And it's a major mode, of course, right? Dorian is a minor mode, and I call it the happy minor. There's something about when you play Dorian, Carlos Santana, a lot of these tunes just come up. I mean, it just makes you smile. You're like, that feels good. I like Dorian. Dorian makes you groove. Phrygian, that's a dark mode. That's the darkest of the 3 modes because it starts with a half step. And it's just a really aggressive and strong minor of the 3. Lydian, I call the exotic major. Mixed Lydian, I call the funky major, or kind of stronger major. Mixed Lydian is almost as common as Ionian is. Mixed Lydian is super, super common to know. Lydian, much less common. And then Aeolian is the minor. It's the stoic minor. There's no funny business, unlike Dorian, with Aeolian. It's straight serious, but it can be epic and rock and heavy as well. So the modes, the chord progressions or scales, they can conjure up these moods as your songwriters and stuff like that. All right, so we talked about number 1, that modes were nouns and verbs, right? They were a thing and an action. Number 2, we talked about that modes are not only scales, but they're also chord progressions. Whew, that's the big one, man. That's a big one. Here's a one for guitar players that really took me a long time. The modes have nothing to do with the scale position you're playing, right? So when I was taught this second position, I was taught this as G Ionian. Then the one that started on A was A Dorian. And then the one that started on B was Phrygian. Then the next finger is C for Lydian. That was kind of weird that the pattern didn't change for that one at school. That was kind of weird. And then mixed Lydian was number 5. And then Aeolian was the first one way up here. That's only 1/7 true for all of that. If you think about it, any one mode, all 7 modes, excuse me, are made up from the same 7 notes. So if I have all 7 notes right here in 2 octaves, then I have all 7 modes available to me in this position. Some people say, yeah, but that's not true because the G is the lowest note. Well, technically, honestly, it's the F sharp, so you'd have to call it Locrian. That mentality doesn't fly on other instruments. The lowest note dictates anything. I mean, this would be my E guitar. And everything I would play would have to be in E because that's the lowest note it has. So having it just because your pattern ends on that note here doesn't mean that that's the only scale that it's named after. I know this is kind of confusing. This is a huge one. I mean, even when I went through Berklee College of Music, they taught them named by patterns like this. But it's silly. I mean, I can play a scale on 1 string. So what does that mean? That's the same notes. Well, what just happened there? What if I start an octave higher, I can do G major up here. I can move it back into pattern 1. I can cross patterns. Right, I just played 1 G major scale. The music world heard 1 G major scale. You guys in the guitar community saw me just do it like 6 or 7 times, whatever it was, across the fretboard. You have to break the mentality that a single pattern is only 1 mode. It's taught that way, and it's 1/7 true. Any one pattern you play has all 7 notes, therefore it's all 7 modes. The way I teach it, like even in my book for modes and stuff, they're just the 5 pentatonic patterns plus 2 notes. That was something I didn't know either. When I learned the modes, I learned them as new scale patterns. I didn't know that I already knew 5/7 of them as the pentatonics. I thought that was so annoying when I found out that later, when I figured it out for myself, that I wasn't taught that. They were just taught like 2 separate entities, and they're not, right? So if you played, for instance, pattern 2 of the pentatonics, you're really adding an F sharp and a C note to make the whole scale, the whole key. And in fact, that's the same 2 notes, F sharp and the key of G. It's the F sharp and the C that are added to the pentatonic to make all the 5 patterns become the 7-note modes. Number 4, modes are not seasonings. I see this time and time again. Oh, let's see, I'll start my solo with a little A Dorian, then maybe I'll sprinkle a little Lydian, I think, and then I'll try some Aeolian, I guess. And it's not like salt and pepper and hot sauce you just sprinkle on to season to taste. The chords absolutely dictate your mode. Unless you're playing completely solo, like there's no accompaniment, there's no chords, there's no one around you doing anything, then you have some wiggle room with that. But that's a rare situation. You are most likely playing with chords. So in the key of G, if someone started a song that was on D and it went C to G, you're in D mixolydian before you pluck your first note. There's no choice. The music world centered itself on D, the D chord. It's using the chords from the key of G, therefore you are in D mixolydian. You could say, well, what happens if I play an A Dorian scale? It's just gonna sound like you're playing the same notes, just shifted over with a different emphasis on a different syllable, if you catch my drift, different emphasis on a different syllable, right? So it's important to recognize that you're always at the mercy of the chords. Whatever the happy chord progression, happy mode sound, happy solos, happy melodies, whatever. All right, the last one to think about too is modes can happen on what I call a global level and play in the changes level. What do I mean by global? Well, technically, if you were playing, when I say playing global, I usually mean one scale for all the chords you're soloing over. That's a slang term, but I think it's pretty commonly understood, but it's not a musically defined term. Some people may say diatonic, but sometimes when you play globally, you're not actually playing diatonic. Maybe it's a pentatonic that's outside of a key that fits all the chords. So it's a kind of a looser blanket playing globally. Playing changes means you're outlining the notes and ideas to go with each specific chord, or you can mix and match that level of it. So modes happen, this idea number 5, modes happen as a global idea and as changes. So if we did have D, C, and G, now personally, I don't think anything more than the D sound kind of establishes itself. The C and the G go by kind of too quick to become their own modal environment, if you will. So when you're soloing, you're just thinking D mixolydian. Right, your notes are resolving to the D note within that scale. If you played a D major scale, ooh, you would hit a C sharp note when you had a C chord in there. Oh, it would sound awful. So it has, the chords dictate this kind of stuff. So that's playing globally. If you're playing the changes, you would probably need to have a little bit more time on each chord to establish that sound. Now, the modes can also happen over changes, especially when you're not in one key. If you're moving dominant chords around. So if you're playing D7 to C7, right? There's never two seventh chords in one key. I don't mean major sevenths, right? You gotta be clear about that. Dominant seventh chords, there's only one per key, and it's the 5 chord, and it goes with mixolydian. So if you ever see a song that's D7 to C7 or something, you're changing keys, whether you think about it or not. That's what is happening. So you would have to, if you didn't play pentatonic based blues rock stuff, you have to change the notes. So I'm going from a D mixolydian to C mixolydian. You know, and again, eventually the whole neck becomes all of your scale stuff. All right, so I hope some of these ideas kind of gave you some clarification or some insight how to aim on this. This wasn't about guitar patterns and how to learn fingerings and stuff like that. That's a different skill set, more based in guitar. This was kind of more of a music video with guitar in mind. So again, to review the 5 ideas, modes are both a thing and an action, right? So there's a modal chord progression, that's just a thing. But then you could also act modally by playing over a mode repeatedly to induce that mode a lot more, like along vamps and jam bands and stuff like that. They do that kind of thing. Number 2, melodies are beautiful. Modes are chord progressions and scales. The chord progressions is the big one. It took me years. I only ever thought of modes as scales. They are based in chords first. It's almost always a chord thing first. You have to be based on that chord in the key. The other thing, as a guitar player, number 3, the modes are not based on a positional pattern based. Modes are not seasonings, number 4, right? You don't just sprinkle them ad hoc when you decide to. They have to be based on the chords. And finally, number 5, the modes can be thought of as a global scale solution and a playing the changes solution as well. The modes are a big topic. They're huge in the world. People have a lot of misunderstandings about how you use them or why they exist. They kind of exist with or without us. We don't have to acknowledge them and write their name for them to exist. As soon as you start putting some chords together, modes are happening. As soon as you start playing some melodies, modes are happening. Well, even if you're just in the major, that's a mode. Or just the minor, that's a mode, right? So recognizing this helps a lot as a musician. And you can check out our book. We have a modes book, Lead Guitar Workshop. That helps kind of go through both this stuff as musicians and much more deeply as a guitar player, patterns, examples of songs that use modes. We'll talk more about this as we go too. But I wanted to make a kind of a general video about how to look at and understand the modes a little better. All right, well, if you like what you're hearing, please hit the subscribe button, the notification bell. Check out leadguitarworkshop.com. We have our books for sale. I do lessons and stuff as well. There'll be a lot more coming this year. So please sign up on our mailing list, and I will see you guys out there and keep playing.